A little time. Yes, we have finished the chapter number 13. And if you perspective, when we started the chapter 13, what we were trying to do, we had finished the first two sections of Bhagavad Gita, the Tvam Padartha and then Tat Padartha. So the first six chapters, as we had discussed earlier, dealt with the human unit, the human consciousness, and all the problems and challenges and spiritual practices. So Bhagavan talked about karma and bhakti and the yajna and all these things in Jnana Karma in chapter 4, Sarva Karma Sannyasa, and how to meditate and different methods of attaining concentration in chapter 6. That is for purification of the consciousness. And 7 till 12, we discuss things like the chapter 7, where he talked about his para and apara prakriti, and then the vibhutis, and then chapter 9, the Rajogihya yoga and the secret of secrets. And then he had his Vishwarupa Darshana, and again he talked about bhakti and other things in 12th, and that section came to an end. The 13th, which appeared to be a little compact, a little philosophically loaded, was so because he was trying to sort of establish what is called Vakyartha. Tat Tvam Asi or Tvam Tat Asi. So Jiva Brahma Ekatva. Therefore, he had to start with Kshetra Kshetrajna Yoga. And what is that Kshetra? This everything, this Jada Varga, what is not having consciousness, whatever is Anatma. Kshetrajna is that consciousness, that para prakriti. And then this para prakriti, as you see in all individuals, is no different from the para prakriti, which is overall one. And both para prakriti and apara prakriti, purusha and prakriti, here purusha, the purusha that we understand in the Sankhya and other things, is essentially in Vedanta kind of seen as the para prakriti. And then the Jiva Brahma Aikya is established by mentioning that there is only one Kshetrajna, not two or three Kshetrajnas. That is how we studied that. And Bhagavan mentioned different techniques of meditation, how to sort of realize, how to understand the equivalence and meditate on it. He mentioned the four categories of sadhakas. He mentioned about it. You have these Vedanta vicharakas, those who are doing those jnana meditations. Then those who are yogic people who are trying to unify their mental habits, bring them together, thinking that I'm Purusha caught up by Prakriti and stuff like that. In the Sankhya Parampara, the yogic tradition, and then there are people trying to do Antakarana Suddhi, which was clarified between chapter 2, 3, and 4. That was the third category, and fourth were blind followers, but with great shraddha and affection and respect for the spiritual tradition and for the Shruti Vakyas, the Upanishadic Vakyas. That's what we studied, and then he sort of mentions how all of it, you need to have that clarity. In chapter 13, that's how we sort of concluded. We discussed this now. You may appear to be a little surprised that here he's going to talk about Gunatraya. Okay. And in order to understand it, in addition to looking at Shankar Bhashya and Madhusudana, I think it will be appropriate for us, in fact, to look at a bit of introduction, very well explained by Shankaranandi, why Bhagavan is bringing about these gunatrayas, these sattva, tamas, and rajas, how they play games in the human consciousness. What is the importance of understanding that? In the previous chapter, he has mentioned about the kartutva and bhoktritva, that Purusha is the cause for all the kartutva in this Karyakarana Sanghata and the Sarira. And then he also mentioned about the bhoktritva, which is the Purusha, that consciousness, the Paraprakriti in all of us. And then he discussed all that and put it in a perspective. He mentioned two more things, that this Kshetra Kshetrajna Sanyoga is the one which explains whatever appears as real, essentially saying that there is a superimposition. The consciousness is pure, but then we superimpose on it what appears to us because of our own ajnana as paramarthika, which is essentially vyavaharika. It's pratibhasika, it just appears, it's not fundamentally real. Therefore, that he mentioned. Then he mentions whatever bondage or whatever we are facing here is because of guna sanga, if you remember in 13th chapter, because of association with Prakriti and all the kriyas which are happening. He says it's because of these gunas they are happening, because of Prakriti they are happening. And this Prakriti is Trigunatmika, because of which whatever activities are happening. But Purusha, that Suddha Chaitanya, is nowhere doing any of it. He's just a silent, he's Drashta, Anumanta, everything, because he's there. So he's also Vakta. You can do all these superimpositions, but he or she, the pure consciousness, has no real role in all this. That was the context in which we discussed it. Now he's saying, before we start it, let's look at how Sankaracharya mentions it. But I would suggest that we first do the Sankarananda because he gives the best example, a best introduction. Once we do that, our Sankara and our Madhusudana Saraswati will almost become superfluous because it's such a deep understanding in the Sankarananda. It's a very good introduction. We'll do that. So he starts his introduction like this. Purvadhyaye mumukshoho atma anatma satatvam vijnatam ichhatah. So he wanted to explain to Arjuna two things. The mumukshoho, that means all the people who are aspiring for liberation and freedom. Atma anatma tattvam vijnatam ichhata idam sariram khetram anatma. This khetra is anatma, this body, this physical body. And this whole material reality that you're struggling with or you're identifying with is Kshetra, that is Anatma. Kshetrajna eva Atma, Aham Padartha, that I-ness, that not that Ahankara. I here is that Suddha Sattva Rupa, Aham Padartha iti Bodhuitva, having explained that to Arjuna, Kshetrad Vibhaktasya, Kshetrad Vibhaktasya Atmanaha Kshetrajna Chapi Mam Viddhi. And then he says that because Kshetrajna, he clarified these are two things, and immediately he says, I am that Kshetrajna. That means you and me are not different. There's just one unified consciousness. And you appear to be different. I appear to be different. But this is all one consciousness. Iti Brahma Abhinnatvam Pratipadya. This is most important. That the Jiva and Brahman are essentially one, but because of ignorance, we are caught up in limited consciousness. Prakriti eva kartritvam bhaktritvam cha atmanaha. So Purusha and Prakriti, what are these? Para Prakriti and Apara Prakriti. So essentially, it is the game of the Prakriti, Para Prakriti and Apara Prakriti, that you can say that Kartva, Ishvara, this Karya Karana Shanghata, that we have this body and all the Indriyas and everything, how are they being active? Because of the game of Prakriti. Kartutvam bhoktritvam cha atmanaha. And that the Atma is Bhokta, which is attributed to it, also is essentially because of that Para Prakriti. Prakriti tat karya, right? So Prakriti tat karya sakshinaha tad guna shangatah eva sansara natu vastuta iti uktam. So this is essentially because of the association with gunas. Just give me a second. I'll just quickly shut the door because there's a bit of noise. Sorry, I just forgot to close the door. It will take 1 second. Yeah, so the whole story is like this, that actually there is no bhoktritva and there is no sansara, but it is only because of a certain superimposition. Natu bastutah iti uktam. Tatra ke gunaha. So obviously the student will have a few questions in his mind. What are these gunas? Of course, Trigunatmika have been mentioned earlier. But ke te gunaha, teshu purushasya katham shangaha. And then with those three gunas, how this purusha gets involved. This purusha is supposed to be asanga. Asungo ayam purusha. How it that get connected with them. Kathamba gunaha purushasya badnati. And then these gunas, sattva, tama, rajas, how do they tie up the purusha, the paraprakriti or the purusha in all of us? Gunebhya mokshanam chagatham, and then from this trigunatmika prakriti, from these three gunas who are trying to tie us up. This is the most important chapter, by way, for me, for for people who are still in the world, for all of us in a way, but mostly for people who are in samsara, those who are still doing social economic activities, because they are 24 hours under the pressure of these three gunas. So this is an important chapter for both karma yogis and bhakti yogis and all of us in a way, but more so for people who are still grihasthas and all, because they are all the time exposed to very tricky games of these gunas, and Bhagavan therefore is clarifying all this. But he also gives importance that even sannyasis have to perfect this understanding. Otherwise, even though they know what is Purusha, what is Prakriti, they will not find it easy to break the shackles of Prakriti, which which is kind of working on them. Katham va gunaha purusham badnanti gunebhyo mukhyana cha katham. How one can get liberated, get oneself released from the pressure of these gunas. Guna muktasya cha kim lakshanam. And then there is a person like any of us who becomes guna mukta, free from these trigunatmika prakriti. So how do you recognize him? How does he behave? Okay. Iti akankhayam. So with this set of questions in the mind, prakritehe pravriti samarthyam tad guna vibhagam gunanam swarupam karyam cha bandhakatvam. So he is trying to now deal with those things of prakriti, pravriti samarthyam. So there is this, because of prakriti, this it has this ability to sort of influence and push us into different kinds of activities. And tad guna vibhagam gunam, and then how these gunas work with each other and how can you categorize them, what is the nomenclature, and gunanam shorupam karyam cha, and what is their swadharma. So for example, how does tamas look like, what tamas is all about? When it manifests as our swabhava, what are the things we are supposed to expose? Like when you become a little tamasic, what are the things that will become visible in us? What are the symptoms? When we become too rajasic, what are the symptoms? When we become sattvic, what are the symptoms? These things will enable us to recognize these gunas attacking us disproportionately, and we would try to rescue ourselves. And what is the Swarupa will know, and what is the Karya, how they tend to modify our behavior. Bandhakatvam, and how they limit our ability to transcend our limitations. They imposed certain outer limits to the way we can spiritually succeed or materially succeed, because they have their what do you call it, binding nature, and how these forces work on us. This is very important for us to understand. Swaswa utkarshena paraspara avivavakatvam. And then, for example, if you have tamas is dominating in you, that is the utkarsha. And then how that establishes guardianship over you. If a person is very tamasic, allows tamas to rule over him, what are the things he'll suffer and how it sort of controls him? If sattva guna improves and how sattva controls us, this is a tricky thing, it's very important. Tat phala vedam, so, and what will be the outcome? How the tamasic person trying to do something will be different from how a sattvic person achieves it. Safala vedam cha gunabadhasya phalam tana muktasya api phalam. And then once you become gunabadha, what are the outcomes for you? And when you successfully try to control yourself and you come out of it, and then if you become guna mukta, how they work on you. Both the things, guna baddha and guna mukta. Phalam cha guna muktasya lakshanam. And what are the qualities again? How do you recognize him? Guna atikramana upayam cha etat sarvam. And then, okay, we will try to be guna mukta. We know the lakshana, but how to do the atikramana? how to overcome the forces of these three gunas working on us. Iti, okay, तन्मुक्तस्यापि च गुणमुक्तस्य लक्षणं गुण अतिक्रमण उपायं च एतत् सर्वं कारणं गुणसंगोस्य. That is what we had done in the chapter 13, that karanam for whatever that we become abadha essentially because of the guna sanga, because of association with these trigunas. Iti vakyartha vispastikirtum, in order to clarify this, Chaturdasa Adhyaya Arabhyate. Tatra Ado, I have started this chapter 14, that is saying, Tatra Ado in the beginning, Kshetra Kshetragyoho, Bhinnatvam Kshetragyasya Swasya Brahma Abhinatvam Cha. There is difference between what is Kshetra, which is Anatma, and Kshetragya, which is Atma, which is Ahang Vritti Samparna, that Suddha Padartha. And Swasya Kshetragyasya Brahma Abhinatvam. It's not different, it's no different from Brahman. It's the same thing. There is only one Kshetragya. And even though it's avivakta, it appears as if it is vivakta, that we did in the last chapter. Viditavataha Brahma Vidyatehe Videha Kaivalyarthinaha. So those who are doing this Brahma Vidya, and you want to sort of achieve it, and you want to get that Kaivalya in the end. That is the goal, Moksha Sadhana. Samutpanna Jnana Rakshartham. And then you studied and you did this Alochana and Vichara, and then you want to protect it. Bhakshamana Jnana Karya Eva Prabhuti Siddhaye. Guna Tatkarya Jnanam Eva Utkrishta Muktehe Paramakaranam Iti Bodhitam Sri Bhagavan Paramiti. Bhagavan is trying to say, even if already you understand what is Kshetra and what is Kshetragya, you know that there is no difference between Jiva and Brahma. It's quite possible that you have picked up the main threads of my advice and argument. It's quite possible even then. In order to protect this Atmajnana, it's possible that we sit in a meditation and suddenly we are in a very deep trance and we feel extremely good. And then there is a phone call after the meditation, everything, hits the ground. We lose our thread again. It's quite possible, isn't it? You get a bad news or something, or you get a request for some involvement, some help. Then you are back in the world, and your concentration, your sadhana, everything goes for a toss. Bhagavan is therefore saying that whatever I have already explained to you, summarized all of Bhagavad Gita in the chapter 13, the central messages of the Vedanta, the Upanishads, that samutpanna jnana, whatever you have achieved, in order to protect it, in order to make use of it until you get moksha, because you don't get it just because you have some porokya jnana. By understanding what's written in the text, we don't get final liberation. We have to have Sravana Manana Nididhyasana, we have to have Apurokya Sakshatkara, then only there'll be some chance of liberation. Otherwise, it's just bookish knowledge, and it's quite possible that whatever clarity we have achieved can also be lost unless we understand how these gunas actually tend to trouble everybody. So we need to be careful. If you become rich, what is the most important thing? You got to protect the wealth you have. So you have to put it in the right kind of banks, and you have to maybe look for lockers and different kinds of portfolio to manage the wealth. Otherwise, it doesn't last long. Similarly, the spiritual wealth we have to protect by understanding how the three gunas attack, they trouble us, so that we can be all the time on the alert. Evam pravrti siddhe guna tat karyam karya jnanam eva utkrishtam. And therefore, you have to understand what is guna and how they work on us so that we can deal with them. Muktehe paranam karan. And therefore, because this is Tattva Darsana gives you the path. This guna karma and the work of these gunas, and how while doing any work or even doing our sadhana, our meditation, we may get affected. This is all pratibandhaka nirakarana. You know where are the thieves, you know where are the risks of falling from your level of internal spiritual unity. You have a sense of equanimity. You or me can lose it any moment, and therefore we have to be on guard. And to be on guard, we need to understand how Prakriti works on us. त्रिभिर्गुणमयैर् भावै इति इच्छाद्वेषसमुत्थेन इति राक्षसी मासुरीं चैव iti asakrita purvam uktam api. Whatever he has mentioned just in the last chapter, trivir gunamayir bhavi ichhadvesha samuthena, all these in the last, and rakshasi masuri, rakshasi and asuri sampat, tad Visesa Pratipate Bhuyaha, again he's repeating it because he has mentioned already, right? And he will again repeat it going forward. Visesa Pratipate Bhuya Punarapi Jnanam Guna Tatkarya Jnanam Jnananam Sankhya Yoga Karamadi Visaya Karanam Madhye Param Shreshtam. If you look at all the chapters he has dealt with, he has mentioned about Karma Yoga, he has mentioned about Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Karma, Sarva Karma Sannyasa Yoga, and how to do meditation, chapter 6. And the Khetra Khetragya, this Purusha Prakriti, all these things he has mentioned. Now he is saying, among all these jnanas, this is very important, what he's going to mention. So let's look at the, verse number 1. श्रीभगवानुवाच परं भूयः प्रवक्ष्यामि ज्ञानानं ज्ञानमुत्तमं यज्ञात्वा मुनयः सर्वे परां सिद्धिमितो गतः. Param, this is Param. This is a very ultimate important thing I'm going to share with you. Bhuyah, again I'm repeating, Pravakshami. Jnananam Jnanamuttamam. He had mentioned that all the Jnanas I have given, this is the Guhyatam in chapter 9. He is saying that this is Jnanam Uttamam. This is very useful. This is very good knowledge. Jnananang Madhya, what are these knowledges that I have given you? I have given you a lot of things. Bhagavan has told us about karma, jnana, bhakti, sankhya. He has told us a lot of things. He's saying this is very useful for us. Yas jnatva, knowing which, munaya sarve, all the munis like Patanjali and Kapila and others, the great meditators, great spiritual aspirants, param siddhimito gataha, and they have achieved final exit. They have got ultimate realizations. That is a promise. And why? In order to raise interest in us, draw our attention, and ensure that we are very attentive and we have full concentration while trying to appreciate what Bhagavan is going to describe in chapter 14. It may not be as deeply philosophical as we heard him speak while he so did in chapter 13, but here the purpose of this chapter is not to give another big philosophical speech, but to explain to us in everyday life how these three qualities, these three gunas, work on us and how they trouble us and how we need to deal with life by understanding the games they play with us. Therefore, he's saying Punarapi Jnanam, Guna, Tatkarya Jnanam, all these three gunas and their outcomes. Jnananam, Sankhya, Yoga, Karmadi, Visekanam. He has already mentioned Jnana, Karma, Sankhya, etc. Madhye Param means Shrestha, superior to all of them. Paratvi Hetumaha. Why is it so Param? Why is it so superior? Then he is mentioning Uttamam iti, he has mentioned. Uttamasya Parama Purusarthasya Mokshasya Karanatvad. Uttamam idam jnanam prapakhyami, because they will help you to overcome the obstacles, remove the obstacles, minimize the obstacles, and therefore reach the moksha, the liberation, ultimate exit from this cycle of births and deaths. Madhavhaktaya mumukshave. I'm not saying this to all, but I'm going to only tell this to people who are very willing to listen to me, who are my devotees and who are looking for liberation. Te samyag upadekhyami ityarthaha. I will elaborately give them advice. I'll hold a coaching session for them. That's what Bhagavan says. Yadava, otherwise, if we want to make sense of this chapter in other ways, kshetragyam Anatma. What is Khetra? Khetram is Anatma. Khetragyaha to Atma. Atma, that self. That is Khetra, in the awareness. Satyadi Lakshanam Brahma. Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. That is Brahma. Brahmeva Khetragya. There is no difference between Khetragya and Brahma. Iti evam rupani moksha vishayani yani jnanani. All these jnanas that I have mentioned in chapter 13th to you, that this is Khetragya, this is Khetra, and this is Paramatatva, the Purusha Prakriti are playing. That is how the samsara appears real to you. But the Purusha is not the real. Chaitanya is not involved in anything. It's just a watcher. And who is doing all this? A Papa Punya. The body mind complex, all these things are happening. But the Suddha Chaitanya is nowhere doing anything, not involved in anything. I have mentioned all these jnanas. Amongst all these ideas that I've given you, what is Atma, what is Anatma, and that there is only Khetragya, and all these subject matter which are relevant to doing sadhana for liberation, yani jnanani tesam madhye. Among those pieces of knowledge that I've given you, idam gunatattkarya jnanam, this particular crucial knowledge, technology of trying to deal with these three gunas and how they influence our life, param, shreshtam, uttamam cha bhavati. It is extremely important, and therefore I call it uttamam. Yadyapi atma anatmano prithak jnanam पृथक ज्ञानम आत्मानः brahma bhinnatva jnanam. So that atma anatma are different, and then this kshetragya and brahma are abhinna. They're just one. Brahma abhinnatva jnanam, prakriti prabilapana jnanam cha, and then this prakriti, how it can be terminated with that atma jnana. Yathedhansi samidogni bhasmisat kurute arjuna. ज्ञानाग्नि सर्वकर्मा कर्माणि भस्मिसात् कुरुते तथा प्रकृति प्रबिलापन ज्ञानम च मुक्तिः नियतम साधारणम असाधारणम एव कारणम. You know, all these are definitely the causes are going to facilitate our exit into liberation, exit from this samsara. These are all fine. He's not doubting it. Tathapi, however, avidya kamadi dosha bataha, because we have this anadi avidya in all of us. And tad jnanam avidya divihi. And then these we have this jnana, even if you get and you have this avidya, this ignorance which is full, we are full with pratibadhyate. So this vidya we get as a result of the lectures of Bhagavan in chapter 13, there's 7 and 8 and 9, and his Vishwarupa that he showed to us in chapter 11. These are good things, but there is powerful avidya in us, and these gunas are working on us. So they become pratibandhaka for us to make use of them and to meditate, because we have to still purify. Mononasa we still have to do. Pratibadhyate tatra eva samyak darsana nisthayam. So even if there is samyak darsana nishta, you want to have atma jnana, pratisthapya gunebhya mochayitva videha mukti gamayati. And therefore, it's like you have investments in spiritual knowledge, but you also have to sort of make the debit account zero. You have to pay back your debt. That is all avidya, and then the outcome of avidya loaded in us as faulty sanskaras and abhyasas and tendency to see things as right which are wrong. These kinds of things are kind of strengthened by the work of these three gunas. Therefore, Bhagavan says that in order to have videha mukti, the final exit, which is ultimate liberation, we need to defeat these game of avidya played by these gunas, three gunas. Tatra idam jnanam atma anatma vivekadi jnanevyaha. So therefore, this guna and tatkarya, sattva, tama, rajas, and how they work on it, they are not philosophically very rich, but very important to help us this atma anatmadi viveka vijnanevyaha. You have the viveka and tattva darsana. You have heard a lot of theories, but the practical part is understanding gunas and how they work on us. So Uttam Bhavati Yatha, then he's giving the example of Ayurveda. In Ayurveda, when they prescribe any medicine, they tell you about the disease and they tell you that this is Pathya and this is Apathya. And what in Urdu they call parhej. So do's and don'ts. They say you take this homeopathic medicine or you take this Ayurvedic medicine, but you shall not take curd or pickles or chilies and stuff like that. If you eat, then this medicine will slow down your recovery, even if the medicine may be very powerful. The recovery will become slower and you may have some complications. If you take apathya, what is non-medicine or which has some contraindications. So that is what he is giving that as an example. He's saying Uttama Bhavati Yatha Roga Jnana Jnanat Ausada Jnanat Anupana Jnanat Pathya Jnanat Cha Ayam अपथ्य पदार्थः एतद् भक्षणम् औषधम् औषधस्य च अपि आरोग्यस्य च. So you may have the knowledge of what is aushadha, what is dosha, what is the physical problem you have, what is the roga you have, what is the aushadha you need to have, anupana, what are the food and other drink habits you need to accompany the medicine intake ways, and what is pathya jnana, what is the other dietary symptoms you have to follow, dietary advice. Okay, and then compared to all that, what is important is apathya jnana, what you should stay away from. Etad bhakshaniyam ausadhyasya, and then that you should have, this is you can take and this you cannot take. If you are taking the medicine, you have diabetes, you should not take sugar, or you should not take too much of ghee or stuff like that. आरोग्यस्य अपि आरोग्यस्य च प्रतिबंधकम भवति. If you take this apatya, that will block your recovery. Iti vigyanam apatya acharana nibrittihi. So that the apatya acharana, taking what is counterproductive for you, you can prevent yourself from being affected by the temptation to do things which will hurt you mentally, physically, health wise, because of certain symptoms which the doctor says are associated with a certain slow, some kind of a disease. It could be diabetes, it could be heart problem, it could be anything, liver problem. Therefore, you have to check that apatya bhakshana you have to avoid. Apatya acharana nibritihi arogya siddhesya. And then if you avoid that apatya acharana, what you should not do, what is apatya, what you should not follow. Pathya is what you should follow. And then apatya acharana you stop, medicine works, health improves. Arogya siddhesya karanam uttamam bhavati. So all that is saying, in addition to knowing what are the truths, what is the truth about Bhagavan and Jiva and other things, the practice aspect is important and we have to pay equal attention, in fact more attention, because if we do not crack that code of sadhana, then all philosophical understanding will not take us very far. That is why chapter 14 comes after chapter 13, which is highly theoretical, where Bhagavan tells about all the secrets, integrated secrets about Vedanta. This is about Vedanta practice, chapter 14. अपथ्य अभाव एक लक्षण अपथ्य अभाव एक what is हाँ अपथ्य अभाव एक बलवत्वाद, because if you can actually avoid what is a don't, that becomes very forceful. It will give a lot of force to the medicine you are taking. औषधस्य अपि आरोग्य सिद्धेश्च तद्वत् ज्ञान तत्फल प्रतिबंधकानां. So you have one theory is that whatever Atma Jnana we are getting from Vedanta, from Bhagavad Gita, but there are Jnana Pratibandhakas, the game of Sattva, Tamas, and Rajas, giving a long introduction because Sankaranandi is giving a lot of importance to sadhana part. That is why I'm reading Sankaracharya just writes 2 lines because he's a very evolved guy, he's a sannyasi. So he doesn't understand the problems of grihasthas and sansari people. Sankarananda is a very compassionate guy. He takes the problems of sadhakas, and he's giving a very long lecture here. Okay, and he say jnana tat phala pratibandhaka. Jnana phala is moksha, and the pratibandhaka of jnana phala is this guna, this triguna, and their games. Gunanam tat karyanam, and the outcomes, how they influence our lives. Cha jnanam purvakta jnana jnananam uttamam bhavati, and therefore all that we have studied so far, we need to understand chapter 14 with a lot of attention. Guna tat karya samandha abhaveka valavatva jnanasya cha tad phala siddhescha. So if we understand the guna and the outcomes thereof, then we can actually protect the benefit we are likely to get having the tattva jnana in chapter 13th or 12th or 7th or 9th or whatever. We will make use of it in a much better way. Therefore, it's very important. First, Tadeva Vispastayati Patanjali. So that is how he's saying that, Jad Jnatva iti, knowing which Jad Jnatva Munaya Sarve Param Siddhim Itogataha, in the second half of the first sloka. Sravanadi Janya Jnana Sanrakya Hetuhu Swena Guna Atikramana Hetutvena Cha Muktehe. Now we have Sravana, Vedanta Sravana we did, but we don't give proper attention to the play of three gunas in our life. Then whatever we hear will not have any benefits, because the gunas will continue to play their game with us and they will defeat us. It is like you have a few military equipment with you and you buy a few missiles and fighter aircraft, but you don't have enough border security force. You don't have radar system to recognize who is coming to bomb you. What is the point of having a few fighter jets? You cannot fight a war. You have to have enough defense mechanisms. So this chapter is about strengthening our spiritual defense mechanisms against the attack of Lord nature, which is hidden in all of us. Okay. And then Paramakaranam yad guna tat karya jnanam jnatva tad jnanena yad kartavyam tat krutva ityartha. So whatever is kartavya, after learning this technological aspect of spiritual self-defense, we can be better equipped to follow the path of self-knowledge. Muneha Brahma Videha Sukadaya Yateyaha. Who are these munis? He's talking about Shuka, Vyasa's son, and all other yatis. Yateyaha, those who are Jatna Silaha. Itah Asmat Prakritad Gunatrayana Muktaha Santaha. Then when we are free from the game of these three gunas of this Prakriti, Param, Punarabhritti Rahitatvena, then we shall not be reborn, because Pratibandhaka Abhava we have ensured, Tattva Darshana we have ensured, Manonaso we have ensured. Then what can anyone do to us? Verily Bhagavan will be with us. And Rahitatvena Nitya Niratisaya Ananda Rupatvena cha Sarva Siddhibhya Uttamam Siddhim Videha Muktim Gadaha Punnatvam Prapta Ityartha. So they get the full comprehensive license to leave this samsara and never come back here, because they have ensured Tattva Darshana, they have removed all Pratibandhakas, and therefore there is no roadblocks, no obstacles. God's grace is there. They have done all the sadhanas, so they'll quickly go away. So it seems he's trying to say, if I can summarize all that he said so far in 3-4 sentences. One is, we may do bhakti, but let's imagine we are greedy. There is some game going on there. We easily get angry with other people. We have negative rajas. We are procrastinating in nature, or we are lazy in nature. There is a game of tamas. So and then there is high sattvas, then we want to be in a very peaceful, happy spiritual setting. If these things dominate, we do not understand how to recognize what kind of force is playing out in our lives, in our everyday life. Even though we may have perfect understanding, even though we may be meditating for 1 hour or 2 hours or 3 hours, even though we may be doing a lot of japa and mantra ucharanam and a lot of Ishwara Upasana, we are not free from the powerful game of these three gunas. That is what is frightening, and therefore he's saying that is important for you to take note of this. Now, let's look at the next verse. Idam jnanam upasritya Mama sadharmyamagataha sargepi nopajayante pralayena vyathanti cha. A person who sort of idam jnanam upasritya, this guna and their games, if a person fully captures it, understands it, and then he sort of does what is required, then he says, Mama sadharmya agataha. And then the devotee, the spiritual aspirant, reaches a stage of equality, a state of abhinnatva, non difference with Parameshwara, with the Brahman. Sargepi nopajayante. This why he's saying sargepi nopajayante, because he's already having Brahma Prapti and therefore he'll not be born. Then why are you mentioning all this? We will make sense of it when he's explaining the meaning of it. But he's saying they will never be born again, even in Pralaya Kala, when Mahapralaya happens. Not Bhyathanti, nor are they happy. The whole sansar will come to an end. They are not affected because they are at that, they have got sadharmya with Param Brahma, with Bhagavan. That means they have become ekakara. There is no difference. Let's look at how he has explained it. Taduktam punarabrutti rahitatwadi visheshanaihi videha muktehe paratvam tadeva vispastayati mumukshivihi tat siddhaye eva yatnaha kartabhya iti suchayitum idamiti. And therefore, we should get that videha mukti, then we need not bother about any pralaya or any sushti. If there is sushti, we shall be reborn again. You see, there are three kinds of pralayas. One is nitya pralaya and nitya sushti. You know what is it? Whenever we get up early morning, there is a sushti. There is a new world actually. When we go to deep sleep, we are as good as dead. When we wake up, we again reconnect with samsara. It's as good as a punarjanma. And then we go to deep sleep, that is nitya pralaya. Then there is pralayas, we are every time dying and getting reborn because of one karma pressure, but there is a khanda pralaya. Once in a while that happens, if you remember the different kinds of pralayas we discussed. Then there is a mahapralaya, and then there is a big mahapralaya where everything gets in the Brahma, that he has a day and a night, right? And when he has a day and a night, when he wakes up, he does again a Srishti, a Sarjana. Then when there is a Mahapralaya, that very Brahma also goes. Vishnu, Maheshwar, everyone goes. No Devata, Swarga, everything goes. What remains? Nothing. Everything becomes a causal form in Brahman. And then everything starts again. So that is the Sarga, the beginning thing. One is Sarga of this Brahma, and then there is a complete Mahasarga when starts, everything restarts. Okay, that is what he was trying to mention. But these people will not be born even now or Sargantare, nowhere. They are completely sort of liberated. Idam bhaktam upakrantam jnanam guna tatkarya vishayam muktehe. So what is these three gunas and what is their outcomes? How do they play? Parama karanam upasritya. So when upasritya means what kind of upasana you will do? How will you sort of rely on this? You will have that parama karana. What is the final cause of liberation? That is pratibandhaka abhavaha. With bhakti and jnana, but pratibandhaka abhava is very important. And therefore you have to remove this. Gunaha tat karya jnanena. You can understand these three gunas and how they affect us. Yad anushtayam yad upastritya. By doing whatever anushtana, that means whatever achara vyavahar we have to do in jnana sadhana. Gunatraya tat karya jnanena. If you understand sattva rajas and how they work, by understanding in nirantara brahma nishtaya, then you are established in Brahman. You can be more successful because whatever problems, whatever weaknesses are leaking into the system, there is any seepage. You can block that seepage in the spiritual life. Gunatraya atikramanam kritva ityartha. Then you can overcome. You become, this. All Bhagavan has mentioned earlier that everything is Trigunatmika, but you try to be Nistrigunya Bhavarjuna. Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma, Asthulam, Ananu, Aharshvam, Ityadi Sruti Pratisiddhasya. That Param Brahma is what? Sruti Pratisiddhya is very famous, well established. That Brahman or Atma is Satyam Jnanam Anantam Brahma. Asthulam is not physical. Ananum is not Sthula, it's not Sthula. And aharshvam, adirgham, it's not small, it's not big. What is this? Nirguna nirakara, Shruti pratisiddhasya, nirvisheshyasya. No definitions, no way to describe it. Mama parasya, that is me, Bhagavan Vasudeva, Param Brahma. Brahmanaha sadharmyam. What is the sadharmya? Sadharmya, Vaidharmya, and Nyaya Darsana is that, let's look at this. This is a red pen, and this is a pink color pencil. This is a red color pencil. Do you know what is the sadharmya between them? They both can write. That is sadharmya. And what is vaidharmya? And the one is red color, so maybe one is a pen, another is a pencil. So that is the vaidharmya. Sadharmya, both can write. Both are made of plastic. Both are dravyas, physical objects. So this is sadharmya. Samana dharma bhattvam, similar qualities they have. That is sadharmya. Vaidharmya is different qualities that we attribute to them. Now, does Brahma have any qualities? It is nirguna, nirdharmaka. There is no way to describe it. Then why Bhagavan is saying those who have got my sadharmyam agataha, they have achieved my sadharmya. What does it mean? Is it not a contradiction in terms? Yes, it is contradiction in terms. This is tuti paraka. In order to praise, in order to create motivation in us, he's saying this. When he's Advitya, how can we be like Brahman? Is there a Sajatya Veda? There is a Sajatya Veda between two. One is a pen, the other one is a pen. These are Sajatya Veda. And between this pen and the scale, we have Vijatya Veda. One is a scale, the other one is a pen. Right? And Swagata Veda, this is the holder. This is the holder clip, and this is the pen, the holder clip, and this is a Swagata Veda, whole and parts. That is the difference. Now in Brahman, these three Vedas are not there. Sajatya, Vijatya, Swagata Veda, Rahitatvam in Brahman. And it is also Desha, Kala, Vastu, Paricheda, Sunyatvam, that is also there. It is not limited by space or time or its physical entity. No, it's not a physical entity. So there are no limitations, no way to describe it. It's avachya. Then why do you mention about sadharmya? That this jnani will have my dharma. That means you have some dharma? He's explaining. No. There is no. That is essentially what does it mean? Purnatvam. That he gets comprehensive, complete truth, complete freedom he attains. Therefore, he's praising, he's motivating the student, saying, you will be like me. That is all he's trying to say. You will be like means what? You will cease to exist. You will become verily me. That non-difference you will have awareness of. No to samana jati rupadi matvam. That I discussed. That samana jati rupadi. This is a dravya jati. That is a guna jati. No, not that nayaka kind of a thing. Adimattam niravaivasya nirgunasya nirvisheshasya brahmanaha jatyadi dharma asambhavat. That Brahman, which is Niravayava, has no physical parts. Nirguna, no qualities. Nirdharmaka and Nirvishesha, no way you can, it is not particular, it is a universal. It is all pervading. Therefore, it cannot have any sadharmya. What is hinted is purnatva, comprehensiveness, infiniteness, whichever we want to understand it. Sajatya rupe chaturbhujatvadi dharmavatve. If a person gets a little confused, like Chaturbhuja, Chaturbhuja, Vishnu, will you be like that? In that sense, are you saying, Matve vidishopi brahmana samana dharmatvam bhaktum sakyate? Somebody might say that he will look like Lord Vishnu if you take the picture of Vishnu to be Brahman, in that sense. Ajatam, abhutam, apratishtitam, asavadam, asparsham. You see, these are the words used for Brahman. Ajatam, never born. Abhutam, not physical. It never happened. Apratishtitam, it's nowhere there. It's everywhere, but you cannot put it like a pen on a piece of paper. Asabdam, it's not sound. Asparsham, it's not touch. Arupam, it has no rupa. And then arupam, arasam, it's not water. Agandham, it's not a parthiya padartha. It's not a earth material. Avyayam, na vyeti, that we understand that there is no vyaya. It's not modifiable. Anaditva nirgunatva, because it has no cause and it has no qualities, and therefore it cannot undergo any modification. We discussed that in chapter 13. And therefore, so he's saying iti apranam amukham, it is not prana. Don't confuse it with life. Amukham, not face. Asotram, no, not the hearing thing. And avag, it's not the mouth. Amanas, no, it's not mind. Tejas, it's not fire. Okay, tejas come. Chakyus come, it doesn't have that eyesight or anything. And agotram, siras come, it doesn't have a head. Apani padam, it doesn't have hands or legs. So we are removing all adjectives, all descriptives associated with the Brahman. Itija sarva dharma nishedhe. All the dharmas have been ruled out. Okay, asravanat brahmanaha drishya dharma anupapattehe. What is drishya dharma? Anything that you can see, redness, whiteness. It's like a pen. These are drishya dharmas. Pratyakshataha, upasthitam. So we can see them, these gunas. But in Brahman, you cannot see any of these qualities. Anything which is drishya is kshetra, and that is what? Anatma. And drik swarupa, the drashta, that is kshetra, again, that is Brahman. Tadvatve, when the Brahman is like that, tat parichinnatva savavayatva nityatvadi dosha prasangat, anityatwadi dosha prasangvat. So if you attribute any sadharmya to it, it will become parichinna, limited. It will become anitya. It will become savaiva. So therefore, we cannot admit all this. These are all refuted. So sadharmya can only mean purnatva, nothing else. Akasavat sarvagatascha nityaha. That there is another way Upanishad refers to Brahman as akasavat sarvagatascha nityaha. Akasa is nitya, but actually in Vedanta, akasa also comes out of Brahman. It's not ultimately nitya, but it's long-standing. Therefore, we call it nitya, and it is sarva vyapaka. So akasa comes closest to description of Brahman, but akasa is not Brahman. Sakshi cheta kevalo nirgunasya, and that sakshi cheta, that weakness self, and it is nirguna, no qualities in it. Ityadi shruti virodha prasangacha. Therefore, sadharmya can never meant any quality, and there is no comparability of jiva in terms of these describable qualities. What is then common? That Suddha Satta Swarupa Brahman, that is, we are also Suddha Satta Swarupa if we remove all our ignorance. That pure consciousness will be no different from the Brahman. Tasmat. Brahma sadharmyam purnatvam eva. Therefore, the Brahma sadharmya will be only purnatva and nothing else. Purnamadaha purnamadam iti shrutehe, because we have also done this purnamadaha purnamidam, and that we do that Santi mantra every day. Mama sadharmyam purnatvam agataha. So they get my sadharmya, they will get my fullness. They will have that comprehensive understanding, self-realization. Madhabhavam prapta. They will get that Brahma vid Brahmeva bhavati munayaha Brahma vidyatayaha. So those who get this Brahma vidya and they sort of perfect it and they get liberated, sargepi mahad adi prakrita susto api. So when this mahad, out of which in this this paramartha swarupa, you have first the prakriti and then mahad. First maya he accepts, he becomes Ishvara. Then the Srishti Prakriya starts, we discussed in the last chapter, where you have this mahad, and then out of which how these pancha tanamatras, ahankara pancha tanamatras, then these pancha jnanendriyas, manas, karmendriyas, pancha bhutas, and whole 24 tattvas, they come into being. So he's saying that all these things will not affect them, no pajayate, they will not be reborn. Jani Vijam Prakriti Mati Prakritim Atitya. So because they focus on the Atma, they focus on Bhagavan, he has mentioned, you focus on me if you want to overcome Maya. So they have overcome Maya. So why? Because that Jani Vijam, the cause of this whole Janama, this whole Srishti is actually that Prakriti, but they have overcome it. Chideka rasatam praktva. So they get praptatvat because they have that chid eka rasa. They have that raso vaisaha, that Paramatma. So they get this chideka rasa, that Brahman, that consciousness they have. Praptatvat, praptatvat tesham prakriti sambandha abhavat. So there will be no connection with Maya anymore. The gunas will not touch them. Mahasrushto api. Again, when the Mahasrushti begins, no utpatihi ityartha. They are not reborn. Tatha pralay mahapralay. So you have Khanda pralaya or Mahapralaya. Hiranyagarbha nasepi. When Hiranyagarbha also gets destroyed, who is the Srishtikarta? The Brahma himself gets destroyed. Na bhyatanti no nashyanti. They are not destroyed. Why? They are not in any physical form. They are not Sukshma form or Stula form. They have got Atmatva Siddhi and therefore they are not affected. Parama Sukshma Brahma Bhavam Gatanam Tesam Pralaya Kriya Visayatvat Na Kinchit Chalanam Asti Ityarthaha, because they have got this Brahmatva Prapti. So they'll become Achala, Niskriya, Nirguna, same as Brahman. So they are not affected. कहने का मतलब ये है it's not that they'll be born or anything because they don't have a physical body. They have got Videha Mukti. They have become no different from the Brahman. So these are descriptive ways in which we are doing stuti or we are trying to praise these Brahmagyanis. That's all. None of, so that is how he has mentioned, and we will look at the rest tomorrow, and we'll go back to the Sankara Bhashya, and we'll go back to the Madhusudana Saraswati. We have touched the time, so we'll stop here. If you have any questions, you can ask. We'll do this answer. I'm ending the YouTube.